Let me start by saying, unless I misheard, Lucille just said she's going to be 101 years old this week. She's miscounted. She has, I think, but she may have tossed a couple extra years of experience on there as well. So she's real excited about y'all singing happy birthday to her here in about 30 minutes. That's her. She's most excited about that. So Lucille, happy birthday this week. Shorty, happy birthday to you as well. And I hope it's a good one. And 91 or 101, whatever it is, I hope it's a good one either way. It is the last Sunday of the year 2025. And there's a lot of things that's hard to grasp about that sentence. One, that it's the end of the year, especially when it's 70 degrees outside, and that seems odd. That it's the end of the year 2025, which also seems really odd as well. And so when we think about the end of the year, when we think about the close of the year, people start to think about sort of the year-end recap. Next week, we'll have a thing in the bulletin that we do every year about the attendance and offering and various things like that. And we start to think about sort of how the year has went. And I could ask you this morning, how has your year went? And there may be some good things, and there'll be some bad things. There'll be some things that you had planned to do that didn't get done, but probably some things that you finished that have been on the list for a while. There's probably some things that you wish you had done better, some things that you had said that you shouldn't have said, things that you would like to have a do-over on as well. And I don't know our specific cases, but I'm sure that you could all fill in the blanks of what I've just said. And as you start to think about 2026, a lot of people start thinking about doing it better than the year before. They start thinking about changes, improvements. They start thinking about accomplishments that they want. Perhaps a new skill, right? This is one of those things that people want to do. I want to learn how to do this better. Maybe get more organized. And some people need to time straightened out just a little bit. Maybe we want to prioritize our health more in the coming year. These are all what they call resolutions, right? New Year's resolutions. And I think they're good for working people. I Googled it, so that's what it was like. New Year's resolutions for working people. But I started thinking about the people that I would be talking to. And there are a lot of you all that are retired. You're not all 101, but a lot of you all are retired. So I got to thinking then, what are New Year's resolutions like for retired people? I'll get up at 10 instead of 9:45, you know? I'm just kidding. But it's a different world, right? I've talked to people before. I've told you all before about my friend that was the band teacher for years and years and years, and he retired last year. And he came up to school the last day of the week, and we asked him, we said, "What are you doing?" And he said, not really anything. Like he said, but he was so used to getting up every morning and coming to work and then staying for 3 or 4 hours and teaching band and marching and instruments. And he's just totally different now. He took a driving tour around the U.S., which was really cool. But he said it's very different. And so it got me thinking, as we get older, what are we trying to improve? So we might be retired from work, retired from church. Psalm 92 that we read there, Ben read a few minutes ago, sort of speaks directly against the idea of retiring from church, to use a sort of word right there. It reminds people that are Christians, it reminds God's people that age doesn't end usefulness. And think about that for a second. Age doesn't end usefulness. And there are times, I'm sure, as we get older, that we think, I can't do that anymore. And I'll let you fill in what that is, because that is probably different for everybody. But there are things that maybe we used to be able to do that we couldn't do. And we start to think, well, maybe I'm not useful. But to use a resolution word, and a word that you see on the screen here, and a word that came from the reading just a few moments ago, the people, even in age, can still flourish. Think about what the word flourish means to you. Think about what it means for something to flourish, something that is doing better than ever. Well, we can still flourish in God's house. If you're still wondering, do I still matter in the church? Am I still useful in the church? The answer is yes. And it doesn't matter what your age is right now. We have people in this congregation over 90 years old. And we have people in this congregation under 10 years old. And we weave through. And the answer is yes, not depending upon your age. The answer is yes, no matter what. I want to think for just a second, though, because we're talking about older folks. I want to think for just a moment this morning about some older folks in the Bible before we get into a little bit more in depth about us in particular. This is how God used older folks in the Bible. Let's talk about Moses and Aaron for just a second. You may remember that Moses and Aaron were chosen to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. I guess technically Moses was, and then Aaron got tacked on with it because Moses had a few complaints and some concerns. In Exodus chapter 7 and verse 7, I believe it says that they're 80 and 83 years old right there. And you might think that probably seems like a older person to lead them on such a trip. You may remember earlier, I believe it was in Genesis, that Abraham and Sarah are promised a child. And they kind of almost laughed about it, right? They said, the math ain't really adding up. I believe they were 90 and 80, and it was 190 when they had it a little bit later. And it seemed impossible. The same way as leading a bunch of people through the desert seemed sort of impossible. Daniel. I don't know how you think of Daniel, the story of Daniel, but when you look at the story of Daniel, he was actually quite a bit older. I think a lot of times the story in the little kids' books almost makes him seem like a young person, but he's really not in the story. It said that Daniel served God from the days of his youth for over 70 years. And he's well over 80 in Daniel chapter 6 and Daniel chapter 8 when the following happened. These are three things that happened over the course of 3 chapters in the book of served as one of 3 governors over the kingdom of Babylon. He's thrown into the lion's den. He received a series of visions about the future of the people. All this is happening under what we would call for Daniel, old age. What about Zacharias and Elizabeth? You may know them, right? Luke chapter 1 and verse 7, you'll read about them. But they were both, according to Luke 1 and verse 7, it says they were both advanced in years when they gave birth to John the Baptist. Zacharias went through some challenges whenever that happened there as well. But you'll read in Luke chapter 1 that Zacharias at an advanced age was still serving in the temple. What about Simeon and Anna? This is when Jesus is born. It's when Jesus is brought to the temple. And these people bore witness when he was presented to be circumcised. This is Luke chapter 2, 25 to 38. It's a longer reading. I'm not going to read it. But they were both still serving in the temple. Anna's 84 years old, and it said that she had been serving God with fasting and prayers night and day. 84 years old. That's retirement age well beyond, right? But it said she was still serving God. What about Paul? So we get into the New Testament, and most of our stories of Paul are written by Paul, right? They're mostly from letters, and he tells a bit about himself. But if you go to Philemon chapter 9, there's no chapter, or I guess verse 9, because there's no chapter. It's one chapter in itself. But he describes himself in Philemon chapter 9, Paul does, as the aged. He speaks of himself as being aged. But think about what he was doing at this time. At this time, he was writing letters, some of them from prison. He was traveling. he was visiting, he was planting and encouraging churches. There's a handful of people here that we would describe in 2025 as well past retirement age. And all of these same people at this point were still working for the church, or in the Old Testament, working for God. We are called to flourish. Psalm chapter 92 in verse 12, I guess verse 12 and verse 13, we read, shall flourish like a palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Those who are planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. I want us to think about what that verse says for just a second. Our flourishing, our growing, our doing well is not based on age, but it's based on where we are planted. Now, I am absolutely not a horticulturalist. You got the wrong Hopkins sibling twin talking to you about that. Jessica, I'm glad she's not here because I'm not going to say something wrong and she'd have to tell me I had it wrong there at the end. But I know enough about it to know that there are times when you plant a tree and you plant it in a wrong spot and it will not grow. And it has nothing to do with the tree, but it has everything to do with where it's been planted, right? And you may put another tree 10 feet over and it'll grow like crazy, right? But it might have to do with what the soil is like, or where the water runs to, or where the shade hits, or maybe doesn't hit. And that might be where it is. We're the same way, right? We can flourish according to Psalm 92 so long as we're planted in the proper place. So long as we are planted where we need to be. The psalmist used two arboreal images right here. It said, first, the palm tree. Palm tree stands upright. You've ever seen a palm tree before? They'll lean a little bit, but they stand pretty much straight up. They bear fruit year after year, and they survive in very harsh conditions. If you pull up something online or see something on TV or on the news in like Saudi Arabia or Iraq or somewhere like that, some people have been those places in military. You'll see palm trees, right? And it's all desert everywhere. And you think, how in the world can a tree like that grow? Well, it's planted firmly in where it is. There are other things that wouldn't grow there. You could bring a palm tree to your backyard, it probably ain't going to grow there, but it'll grow in a certain spot. They mentioned the cedars of Lebanon. The cedars of Lebanon, there's a cedar tree on the flag of Lebanon. It's been represented. The cedars of Lebanon were brought in to build the temple Solomon used there. But they're known for their strength, for their stability, and for their long life. What I know about both of these trees, I got to stop because I'm about to get too deep into arboretum stuff right here. But what I know about each of them is they grow slowly, they grow deeply, and they grow steadily. And aren't those good descriptors for Christians? Sometimes we can grow too fast as a Christian. We kind of get ahead of ourselves just a little bit, right? We have to pull that back just a little bit. We have to know what we're focused on. If we grow slowly but deeply, all right, we kind of plant that root in the ground just a little bit. And we're not just something that'll grow up quick and it'll blow over, right? They talk about sometimes Bradford pears, right? And they look really pretty. They shoot up. But what happens the first time the wind blows, right? They knock them over. They're not planted deeply. Sometimes that happens with Christians, right? We shoot up, we're all excited about it, and then something bad happens and we just blow right away. We have to plant deeply right here. We have to grow steadily. Notice it doesn't mean steadily until a certain point, but it's steadily, continuously. I saw something the other day about, it was about cactuses, an age of cactuses, cacti, I guess you would say. And it showed some that were these various ages. And I saw some that were well over 200 years old, and they were still growing. Certain point and then stop. As Christians, if we get to a certain age and we stop, we can't go any further, right? But if we're saying there's no retirement age, we're still flourishing. We're steadily growing still. Let's go a little further with that. The key phrase in all of this is that they are planted in the house of the Lord. Jeremiah chapter 17 and verses 7 and 8, if you want to turn there, we're going to read for just a second. It said, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord and whose hope is in the Lord. For he shall be like a tree planted by the waters, which spreads out its roots by the river, and will not fear when heat comes, but its leaf will be green, and will not be anxious in the year of drought, nor will cease from yielding fruit. The righteous flourish easy, but because they remain rooted in the Word, the church, and in God. Occasionally, really large trees will finally blow over, right? They'll finally die. Sometimes people with skills far greater than us will slice into that, and they'll count the rings, right? You've probably seen those ringed trees. And if you look at the rings, some years they're real wide, and some years they're as thin as a sheet of paper. And if you count them back, you can pretty much figure out what the weather was like in all of those, right? You can count that back and say, oh, this was a year that had all the rain. It grew great, right? But this was the year of drought. Well, I don't think they can cut us open and count the rings on us, but there's some thick years in our lives, and there's some thin years in our lives as well. We're in many ways a lot like that tree, right? Some years we're flourishing. Some years not as much. But the tree kept growing. Even when the years when it was thin, it still kept growing because it stayed rooted where it was. As long as we're planted in Jesus, we're growing as well. God promises faithfulness. Psalm 92, verse 14, it said, they shall still bear fruit in old age. They shall be fresh and flourish. Notice what God does not say here. Notice what we don't see here. He does not say that fruitfulness ends in retirement. The day that I retire is the day I'm done. Doesn't say that, right? Doesn't say that. He does not say that usefulness fades with strength. How many of you last week picked up something when we were moving stuff and thought, oh, that's a little heavy? How many of you 20 years ago would have picked that up and thought, give me two of them, right? I went home Sunday afternoon and drove all the way home, and when I went to get out of the truck, I back spasmed. I couldn't even hardly walk into the house. I was almost embarrassed by that. Then I thought, well, wonder what happened. Because it clearly had to be something, and I couldn't even figure it out what I had done. It just started hurting, right? That doesn't make sense at all. And I thought, well, I don't know if I was very useful or not. Well, when I looked around the room last week, 20 some odd people here, I saw a lot of people being very useful. I saw some people, thin and dusty, that were walking out, they weren't even trying, they were carrying all this stuff. But I saw some of our 90-year-olds putting one can in the box at a time. Both people were useful. Both important role. There are people that were putting one can years ago, probably could have put two in, but they're still working. They're still serving. They're still being faithful to God. Notice God doesn't say in Psalm 92 and verse 14, it does not say that their later years are empty. No, it says that they would flourish in that time. He promised continued fruitfulness. Galatians chapter 5, 22 and verse 23 are what was called the fruits of the Spirit. And we talked about it before, and you've read these before, you've heard them before. But some of these fruits of the Spirit, some of that is physical, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those are some sort of physical attributes that we have. But this faithfulness is not necessarily physical right here, but it's spiritual fruit. I want to think about 5 types of spiritual fruit that we can still produce even in old age. Number 1, faith, right? We can still produce faith. But faith is something that's tested and proven over time. I can ask people that's in this room that are of a little bit older age, has your faith ever been challenged? I'd imagine the answer's been yes to everyone, right? but it's still working. What about another spiritual fruit? What about wisdom? Do you think you're smarter? Rephrase. Do you think you're wiser today than you were 20, 30, 40 years ago? Probably so, right? Why are we wiser? Because of our experiences, right? All of these years that we've been through all these things, we know a little bit more about it. Another spiritual fruit is prayer, but a prayer of trust. You may think about when you were younger and you were praying for this and this and this and this. Jameson was talking earlier about the Christmas catalog, and he said, you open it up, and he said, Cambry circled half the pages, right? Want this, this, and this, right? Sometimes our prayers when we're younger are kind of like that, right? I need this, and I need this, and I need this. But as we get older, do your prayers become not my will, but thy will, right? We realize what we've been praying for maybe in the past was a little selfish. And now we know what we're praying for is from trust that it'll come. What about another spiritual fruit? Encouragement. Encouragement, born from experience, right? To encourage other people. There is so much encouragement in this room when I look around at other people. Last week, I was talking about just a minute ago, last Sunday, how much I was encouraged to see people doing work. I would not have, there weren't many people in this group, like we said, that I said that we could take and win the world's strongest man or strongest woman competition. But that doesn't matter, right? Their heart was what it was encouraging the strength of their heart and what they were doing. What about another spiritual fruit? Just love, right? Patience, gentleness, sincerity, the love that people have. Those are all things that can still be produced long after we've retired. We don't quit those kinds of things. You may not be able to do everything you once did. We probably all can say that. But what we all offer carries more weight, carries more depth, and may carry even more eternal value. Let's go to Psalm 92, verse 15. To declare that the Lord is upright, he is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. Psalmist here says that the faithful continue to live in such a way that their lives declare something about God. I really like to read, but I don't really like to read biographies. For whatever reason, it's just never really been my thing. It just kind of tells a story about a certain person, and it's just not my favorite thing. There's nothing wrong with it. I just don't really like it. Several years ago, I read the biography. This might have been why I read the biography of Leonardo da Vinci, and it was like 800 pages long. And I think I feel like I knew him better than he knew himself by the time it was over with. But in many ways, our life is sort of a presentation of our biography, right? Sort of a presentation of who we are. Our life tells a story. What does our life tell? Well, of prayers answered. Can you think of examples in your life of prayers that have been answered? I'll let you think for a second. The first thing we might have thought about is something that we prayed for, something that we felt like we needed. But I bet the longer you thought, the prayers that have been answered have been more comforting, right? Times when you felt like you were in the pit of despair, when something terrible had happened, when you didn't feel like you could go any further, and something happened that might have been a comforting word, might have been running into the right person, might have been walking into the right place. Our life tells that story. What about trials that God has carried you through? It's not a single person in this room that hasn't went through something, maybe multiple somethings. And your something's different from other people's somethings. And if I had asked you the day that was happening, if you could get through this, your answer probably would have been no, right? But over time, you do. But it took a lot, right? It took a lot of trials. It took a lot of difficulty. And you wear that even to this very day. You'll never take that off. But God brought you through it. Your life tells a story of hope that never failed. I've said it many, many times that the book called, the Stud Circle book, Hope Dies Last, right? The hope that never fails. There's always hope that it would be better somewhere down the line. Well, that's Christianity sort of in a nutshell. It's not always perfect. Things aren't always great. But all of these things are experiences that we have, and you wear all of those. And when I look at you, I know of some of those things that you've went through, and they make me stronger as a result. Don't say that you're retiring from the church. You're telling a story to the group right now, every single day. We're everyone better because of you. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 4 that God comforts us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble. Who is better equipped to comfort others than somebody who has walked with God for many years? When I look out here and I see a group of people that are older than I am, I don't measure it in age, but rather in wisdom and experience. I see people that when I'm going through difficulties, I can lean on and hopefully gain something from them. You matter to the church. You are important to the church. You, no matter your age, are vital to the church. 4 days from now, you're going to see a calendar change to 2026. And that year probably seemed a long way off, not that many years ago, right? I found myself as I've gotten a little bit older, I tell these stories to Will, and I don't know if he's listening, but I feel like I always tell this story about some kind of athletic event that happened, and I tell it like it happened yesterday, and then I realize it was 35 years ago and something like that, and you're like, oh, it couldn't have been that. There's, classic, our Major League Baseball network showed a classic game from 1989 that I remembered watching, and I don't know how I watched it. You couldn't barely see it on the screen. It looked so bad. But you think about it, it's like, how is it that long? 2026 does not seem like a real number to me, right? But they keep coming, right? 1926 didn't seem like a real number to your grandparents. But it came, right? They'll keep coming. They just do. That's just how it works. But Psalm 92 is a powerful reminder that no matter the year, 1926, 56, 86, 2026, you're still planted. You're still bearing fruit. You're still working for God. Just like a tree that's planted by the waters, I shall not be moved. God isn't finished with us. There's no retirement age from church until our life is over. Your role remains vital. And I hope that when we're making our resolutions for the new year, when we're thinking about whatever this year is going to be, that we don't forget the word used in Psalm 92, that we are going to flourish in the new year, no matter our age. If that we can do. If there's something that's been bothering you, something that you're struggling with, something that's been difficult for you, something that maybe has made this year tough, you might need to get it off your chest. If there's something that's been dragging you down or is keeping you from being fully invested in the church, you might want to fix that. Or if you said, I've heard a lot about it and I want to be part of it myself, it might be that you want to become a Christian, and we keep the baptistry up and running for that very reason at any time. Whatever it would be, whatever the case, whatever you need, we're here to help make this next year the best and most flourishing than it's ever been. Whatever we can do, we invite you to come.